Let's take a little look at this 5.3. This is a late JK, probably a 15, 16 would be my guess, maybe a 17. So you guys know I don't really like obstructing grills. This JK is running cool, but he does have the wire mesh and an aftermarket grill. These openings aren't that reduced compared to some of them, but they are. Of course, we got the LED lights, and it looks like this Jeep's going to Washington. It's got a lot of mountain grades, but this JK will do just fine. 5.3 is really quite mild of an engine, as you can hear. It does sound a little bit like a diesel. I think he had a snorkel on this, not sure. You might be fooled to think this is an LT1 because it looks identical to an LT1, but this is an LT1 intake on an L83. I think you can see how clean it is. We got our Motec battery tray, our Shorty air filter. You notice this MAF sensor has 9 wires, so it's got a humidity sensor, air intake temp sensor, mass airflow sensor, a bunch of stuff. Starting in the L87, they got that down to 4 wires by making that a serial sensor, so it actually has its own network with the ECM. But yep, this is a 5.3. This isn't an LT1, and I recommend if you're doing an L83 or an L86, just go with the LT1 intake. Look how much hood clearance you have. It's compact, they run awesome. It's just a good combination. Today we are in a late model JK with what has become somewhat the forgotten engine. You'd be hard pressed to tell this is a late model JK. You might think it's a JL because if you look at this dash and this push button start, that's right, it's got a keyless start and a digital dash. You might think it was a JL, but it is a JK. And the engine is a 5.3 L83, and this is an engine we should talk about because you'd be hard pressed to tell that this engine was a 5.3. When I first got in this JK with a 10-speed and this L83, I thought it was an LT1, just driving it around town. The throttle response is so quick, and there's so much torque, you'd think it's a larger engine than it really is. Now we need to talk about the L83 because GM kind of pulled a fast one on us. They just dropped production of the L83. We know that the L83 was used from about 2014 through 17 or so, 18. I'm not really sure exactly what year they started phasing it out. They did go to the L84, which is the newer version of the L83 that has dynamic fuel management and stop start. So it's similar to the L87, just a smaller displacement engine. There's another engine though that is going to make its appearance, and you might think it's the predecessor to the L83, but it's really the successor, and that is the L82. And while I don't have all the facts, basically an L82 is an L83. GM took the L83 and redesigned it a little bit to add a power steering pump. They laid out the accessory drive a little bit different. From what I understand, it's the only difference between the L82 and the L83. So when GM stopped making the L83, it put us into a bind because it's a fantastic combination with the 8 or the 10 speed. Now here's my personal opinion. I wouldn't get an L83 and put a 6-speed behind it. If you get an L83 from 2014 right up through 2019, they were still running the 6-speed transmission, I wouldn't waste my time with that. GM did put the 8-speed behind the L83. I'm not sure if they ever put the 10-speed behind it, but as you guys know, we do. With the high gear transmission, the L83 is just a dream. It runs strong, gets good economy, it can run on regular gas, and the L82 should have all the same strengths. So as I make this in May of 2022, what I'm saying is we now have a supply of L82s available to us that we will be switching over for our new LT 5.3 build because the L83 5.3 is getting extremely hard to find new in a crate. In fact, I don't think GM ever formally offered the L83 new in a crate. A lot of what we purchase from GM are production engines. They're engines that they used to call it fully dressed. They're engines that have the intakes, the injectors, everything on them. It's not long blocks. If you were to blow your engine up in your Suburban and you went to GM, they would get what's called a service long block. And the service long block is just that. It doesn't include the intake and injectors and a bunch of other parts, exhaust manifolds, that you're supposed to swap over from the old engine. So while long blocks are still available, the actual production L83 I don't think was ever formally offered. And I don't think the L82 is either, but we've got a line on them through GM, so It's a fantastic engine. I've got an L83 in my JL, and in the JL, that L83 with the 8-speed will easily clock over 20 miles to the gallon, even at the higher speeds, 80 miles an hour. It's a phenomenal combination. We'll talk about the L82 a little bit more, but I just want to say that the JK that we're in has a ton of stuff. This digital dash, this one-touch start, it's got electronics everywhere, aftermarket radio. If you look under the dashboard in this thing, it's just packed with electronics. And guys, you know my philosophy on that. Get what you need, and don't get any more in my opinion. Keep it as simple as you can, but get what you want. You will see that we do have one light flashing. That's the throttle light on this dash, and that's because the PCM in this vehicle, or actually in this vehicle it's an ECM, an engine control module. In the earlier JKs it was a powertrain control module because it also did the transmission. This just does the engine, and then it has a separate TCM. Anyway, the ECM was locked by superchips. Starting in 2015, Jeep encrypted the ECMs, so they need to be sent out and unlocked. A lot of you guys do it when you put a supercharger on or a custom tune. So we send them out, and we don't really modify anything in the ECM. We just remove the codes, because now that the GM side is controlling everything, the entire powertrain, including the throttle actuator controller, TAC, we don't need the Jeep side to monitor that. Now, our bidirectional CAN bridge communicates all the information the Jeep side needs to display the information that you need. So if it, let's just say you did have a throttle code or some other code, the check engine light would still pop up. For emissions checks, as you guys know, we work in California. All the OBD2 information, including the freeze frame and digital trouble code data, is available through the GM side, and that's how we have our executive order set up. So it's a pretty slick setup because we don't modify anything. Yes, we do remove a few codes from the Jeep side, but that's very non-invasive. We don't go into the Tipman and hack it. We don't go into the ECM and patch it and try to get the V8 to run off of it. And you know, as time goes on, everybody is rationalizing their conversion. The Hemi conversions are very seamless now. They are larger engines and do require more mechanical work than an LS or an LT, in my opinion. But electronically, we're all getting down to the point where we've got these things pretty much as clean as we can get them. And I'm very proud of what we do, because we can take a GM, pretty much any current production GM powertrain. Now, the newer ones, like 21 and newer, are locked down, just like the Chrysler computers were locked down. And while we can support them, it's just getting more expensive to unlock these modules and program them. As time goes on, it gets less expensive, and then we support more of them. So we do support the new L87 now and the L84. We're going to be doing the L82, which is the successor to this L83. And as you know, we do the LT1. I'm not sure about the LT2, what we're going to do with that. It's very similar to the LT1. We have installed some LT2 intakes now, and we'll talk about that down the road. Let's get back on subject. I said the L83 is somewhat the forgotten engine, and I think it is. It's a fabulous engine. The LS 5.3, while a great motor, and I had one in my own personal JK, and that JK has over 250,000 miles on it. I sold it because we needed more room for my kids. It was a great motor. However, in larger JKs with larger tires, the 6.0 or the 6.2 was just a better choice. Now I got a 5.3 in the shop right now, an LS with 40s, and the guy loves it. But realistically, the LS 5.3 did have some shortcomings in very heavy vehicles. The LT 5.3 doesn't have those same shortcomings. It's got more torque because of the technology, because of the CVVT, the higher compression, you know, the whole spiel. And I find myself getting into these LT 5.3s and thinking they're a bigger engine. They're at least on par with a 5.7 Hemi or a 6.0 LS, especially if it's the non-VVT Hemi. And then when you add the 10-speed transmission, that just really takes it over the top, because it's allowing this engine with all this technology to stay in its power band. The JK I'm in right now, while not the heaviest JK, is still a pretty heavy JK. And this little 5.3 pulls it like nothing. So we got a couple of L82s on the way. I've done my diligence, and essentially they're identical to the L83. GM moved the water pump from the side to the middle, which actually may be an advantage for us, because you guys know when the water pump's hanging off the left side, it can get close to the steering gear. Now normally it's not a problem if you're just running a standard steering gear, but if you're running an XD big bore box, then there could be an interference. So to have the center mounted water pump like the LS is going to be interesting. We'll see how that works. At the beginning of this year, I told you guys I really liked the LT3 and we pushed them. And we sold a lot of them. We bought a lot of new production LT3s, but the issue now is they're gone. And with the supply chain as it is, we can't get more LT3s and we're still getting requests. And I will say most guys just overlook the LT3 and go directly to the LT1. And ain't nothing wrong with the LT1. It's an awesome engine. I think you need to run premium in that engine. You can get reasonably good economy. If you look at the miles per gallon numbers for the LT 5.3 versus the 6.2, there's about a 1 mile per gallon difference, maybe 2. But here's my experience. Now, I own a 2017 Denali with a 6.2 L86. When I drive that Denali, I can break 20 miles to the gallon, but I drive it with a lot of concern, meaning I know when I'm going down a hill to accelerate, I know when I'm going up a hill, I don't push it. Now, of course, when I want power, the power is there. But it's a heavy vehicle and it has a large displacement engine. But here's the moral of the story. If you drive a 6.2 conservatively, I find you can get really good economy. I can drive my Yukon 6.2 and with just a little bit of care, I can get some very similar mileage to the 5.3, but still have that extra power. So the LT1, while no slouch, also gets pretty decent economy. I drove an LT1 to Park City last weekend and I got about 16.4 miles to the gallon. And some of you guys say, oh, well, that's, you know, I do a lot better than that. But this was a heavy JK with 13.5-inch tires, light bars. I think they were 38s. They weren't quite 40s. I've driven V6s that get 9 to 10. I've driven Hemis that get even worse. And I've also driven Hemis that get pretty good mileage. It just, everything really comes down to the setup. But the bottom line is, if you drive a 6.2 LT conservatively, you can get good economy. If you drive it aggressively, you're going to get less mileage than you would in a smaller displacement engine. I would say that if your JK is really heavy and you are running on 40s, you do tow a trailer, you do run at high altitude, I just go for the 6.2. But if you're the average guy, you're living at sea level, 2,000, 4,000 feet, you're running 35s, 37s, you want decent economy, you want to run regular gas, get the 5.3. It's a phenomenal engine. And don't think I've only got a 5.3. You know, when you tell your friends and they got a 6.4 or 6.2, this little 5.3 is no slouch. Now, I have noticed that when I'm at a high altitude, let's say around Cedar City, and the speed limit's 80 miles an hour, the little 5.3 will downshift. And a 10-speed is not a big deal. You might drop down to 9th, you might drop down to 8th, where the 6.2 won't. I also noticed that if we have the AFM mode active, that's the active fuel management, the 6.2 will stay in the AFM mode longer than the 5.3. And the reason is obvious. We're going from a 6.2 engine to a 3.1, where with a 5.3, we're going from a 5.3 to about 2.6.5 liters. So obviously that 3.1 liter engine is going to be able to pull a little bit longer. And I've been doing a lot of experiments with the V4 mode in not only these Jeeps, but in my Denali to see how much benefit you actually get. It's not as dramatic as you would think. The V8's pretty efficient in the V8 mode. Yes, you can get a little bit better economy in the V4 mode, but it's nothing to write home about. You're not going to be getting 4 miles to the gallon better with the V4 mode. I haven't really tested the DFM or the dynamic fuel management in the LT7. We'll be doing a test drive in one of those real soon. And that is a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-cylinder vehicle. And I do notice that it's a little bit smoother in its transition from the 4 to 8 and 8 to 4-cylinder mode than AFM is. Although neither are really that obnoxious. If you have the right exhaust and the right engine mounts, you can run the AFM mode without too much discomfort. Most guys just say, get rid of it. I didn't buy my Jeep to get that extra half a mile to the gallon. I want to enjoy it. I know that the LT3 dried up and some of you guys switched over to the 6.0 or went up to the LT1, but now that we got the LT2s available to us, and I don't want to say how long these things are going to be available to us, we just don't know. The way the supply chain is with GM, they could shut plants down tomorrow. I just know that they're available to us now, and let's just take a quick revisit of what engines are available to us. We can still get the LS 6.0 and 6.2 LS3. The 6.0 is a great motor, as you know. We've got a line on some right now, and I do believe once these are gone, that's going to be the end of the supply. The LS3, we've been hearing rumors that they've been discontinued, but they keep trickling through, so we're going to keep putting them in as long as we can, because that, again, is a good engine. On the LT side, we got the LT2 available to us now, of course the LT1. The L8T is supposed to be available in a crate soon. I don't think it is yet. One of the issues we have with the L8T right now is One, it runs the newer controllers, which are more difficult to work with, and two, GM's running a 6L90 transmission. And the 6L90 transmission is a great transmission, but it's also an old transmission, and we want to run the 8 and the 10 speed. So we're kind of holding off on the LAT just until that market shakes out. So we're going to take this L83 10 speed up to the mountain, and we'll be back shortly.